I was still bent over the table when I heard it. A wet, flat sound, like a towel dropped on concrete. My nephew had his arm buried in my gender reveal cake to the elbow, pink everywhere, 18 weeks, my backyard. And my brother had his phone up, framed, steady, laughing so hard he had to brace it with both hands. He didn't grab the kid. He zoomed. My sister said it's a cake. I'm 33, grow up. My father told me to apologize for making a scene. The scene being my face. So I apologized. 20 relatives watched me apologize at my own party. Then I asked my brother to airdrop the video. All of it. He locked the screen. And before I could ask twice, my mother said, "Send her the cake part. Only that part." Nobody had shown my mother anything yet.
Before we go any further, do me one favor. Hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't, because stories like this one don't travel unless people carry them. And leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I like knowing who's in the room. My name is Andrea Nelson. I'm 33 years old. I'm a registered nurse, a case manager at a hospital on the New Hampshire seacoast, which means my actual job, the thing they pay me for, the thing I'm good at, is building timelines. Somebody comes into my hospital and their family tells me 9 different versions of the last 2 years, and I sit down with the chart and the dates and the pharmacy log, and I find the one version the paper agrees with. I've done it for 9 years. I'm the person who notices when a story has a hole shaped like a Tuesday. Keep that in your head, because my family forgot it. They'd known me my whole life, and they still forgot what I do all day. So let me take you back, not to the cake. 20 minutes before the cake, when I was standing in my own kitchen thinking the worst thing that could happen that afternoon was rain. It was Saturday, June 27th, 4 in the afternoon. My backyard is small. A strip of grass, a fence my husband Dean stained the summer we moved in, a folding table we drag out for everything. I hadn't wanted a party. I want to be clear about that, because later it mattered more than anything else in this story. I told my mother in May that I was 18 weeks and tired, and I'd just post a picture. She called me back 4 times in 6 days. She said her mother, my Nana, would want to see it. She said family only gets so many of these. She offered to bring the tent, so I said fine. I ordered a cake from the place on Islington Street, and I let my mother pick the date. Nana wasn't there. That's the first thing I want you to hold on to. Ruth Vance, 88 years old, my mother's mother, the entire stated reason the party existed, and she wasn't in my yard. My father said the drive from Rye was too much for her in the heat, 40 minutes. I'd driven her farther than that in April to get her teeth cleaned, and when I called her that morning to say I'd come get her myself, she was confused in a way that had nothing to do with being 88. She said, "Andrea, nobody told me there was a party." I let it go. God help me, I let it go, because the tent guy was in the driveway. Here's what my yard looked like at 4 o'clock. 20-some relatives. My father, Glenn, in a golf shirt, doing his thing where he stands with his back to the fence so he can see the whole yard at once. My mother, Diane, moving between people with a tray, saying the same warm sentence to each of them. My sister Whitney by the cooler, sunglasses on, texting. My brother Kyle at the table with his phone already out. His son Cole, 11 years old, orbiting that cake like a satellite for a solid 10 minutes, while 3 adults watched him do it, and none of them said a word. And my cousin Tyler, 16, standing by the gate holding a phone that wasn't his, looking like he'd rather be dead. My father had handed it to him at the door and said, "Get some of the yard, bud." I remember thinking that was nice. I remember thinking my father was finally including that kid in something. I carried the cake out through the slider with both hands. Pink buttercream, white box, one of those little sugar question marks on top. Somebody's aunt said it was beautiful. Somebody's husband said, "Glenn says you're all finally selling the Rye place. My brother-in-law's an agent. Tell him to call me." My father laughed and didn't answer. I heard the whole sentence and it went through me like weather. I was carrying a cake. I set it down on the table. That's where the recording starts. That's the frame you'd see if you ever get to watch it, which, spoiler, most of my family has. I set it down, I straightened up, and Cole hit it. Not a tap, not a kid tripping. He wound up and drove his fist into the side of it, up to the elbow, and the whole thing came apart. Pink inside, pink on the tablecloth, pink up my forearm. That wet, flat sound I still hear when a door closes wrong. There was 1 full second of nothing.
And in that second, I did the stupidest, most human thing I have ever done. I looked at my brother, because he was the closest adult, and he had his hands up, and I thought for 1 second that he was reaching. He wasn't reaching, he was framing. Kyle had the phone braced in both hands, and he was laughing so hard the laugh had gone silent, that awful upper register where nothing comes out. And he didn't lower it. He didn't grab his kid by the shoulder. He moved half a step to the left to clear the umbrella pole out of his shot, and he zoomed in on my face. Whitney took her sunglasses off. She said, "Oh my God, it's a cake, Andy. You're 33. Grow up." And my father, from the fence without moving, said, "Andrea, apologize. You're making a scene." I want you to understand what a scene was. A scene was my face. I hadn't said one word. I had not raised my voice. I had not moved. I was standing in my own yard with my arm covered in a cake I paid for, 18 weeks pregnant, and the offense on the table was the expression I was making. That's the whole thing. That's the entire 9 months in one sentence, and I didn't know it yet. 20 relatives got quiet. So I said I was sorry. I said, "I'm sorry, Cole. I didn't mean to make you feel bad." To an 11-year-old, in my yard. My mother made a small approving noise, the noise you make when a dog finally sits, and started handing out plates like the party had resumed. And honestly, it had. Everyone went back to their drinks. Somebody's kid asked if there was still cake. There was plenty of cake. It was all over the table. Dean was at the grill, and he'd missed the whole thing by about 4 seconds. And he came over with tongs in his hand and looked at my arm and looked at my face. And I gave him the smallest head shake of my life. Not here. I waited about 6 minutes. I wanted to be calm. Then I walked over to my brother while he was scrolling, and I said, "Send me the video." He said, "Which one?" "The one you just took. All of it. Airdrop it. You're standing right there." He tapped. My phone lit up in my hand. Kyle Nelson would like to share a video. And for maybe half a second before I could even reach for accept, the preview came up on my screen. You know how airdrop works. It shows you the first frame before you say yes. The first frame was not the cake. The first frame was a wide shot of my yard from over by the fence. No cake on the table, no me, just grass, the umbrella, and 2 pairs of shoes in the bottom of the frame. My brother's sneakers and my father's boat shoes, toe to toe, standing close together, and the corner of my father's hand up like he was in the middle of a sentence. Then the preview vanished. Kyle had canceled it on his end. He locked the screen and put the phone face down on the table and said, "It's not even a good video." And my mother, who had been across the yard the entire time, who had not touched a phone all afternoon, who had not been shown one single frame of anything by anyone, said, "Send her the cake part, only that part." Nobody had asked my mother a question. Nobody had said the word video where she was standing. She didn't say what video. She didn't say, "What are you two doing?" She named a section, like a woman flipping to a chapter she'd already read. That was 4:11 in the afternoon on June 27th, and that is the exact second my family lost. They just had 18 more days of not knowing it. The last car left at 7:40. Dean stacked chairs. I stood at the sink washing pink out of my arm hair with dish soap, and I wasn't crying, which worried him more than crying would have. He said, "Talk to me." I said, "My mother knew what was on that video." He said, "So? Kyle probably showed her." When? He was standing next to me from 4 to 4:11. She was on the other side of the yard with a tray. Dean stopped stacking chairs. At 9 that night, my phone buzzed. Kyle, a video file, 41 seconds long. I watched it 11 times. 41 seconds. It starts on the cake, already destroyed, Cole's arm already out of it. It ends on me saying sorry. It is technically the cake part. He wasn't lying. And here's the thing that got its hooks in me at 9:04 that night and never let go. It starts mid-laugh. Frame 1, my brother's laugh is already at full volume, already peaked. Nobody starts recording into the middle of their own laugh. You laugh because something happened. The thing that happened was before frame 1. He had been filming for a while before that cake came out. And what he sent me started after the part where he was already laughing at something I couldn't see. I sat on my kitchen floor at midnight with my back against the dishwasher, and I did the only thing I know how to do when a story has a hole in it. I got a legal pad. Let me tell you about my job, because everything after this is my job. I'm a case manager. When somebody's parent lands in my hospital, I'm the one who sits in the room while 4 adult children explain what's been going on at home. And every one of them is sincere. And every one of them is describing a different person.
My work is not to decide who's lying. My work is to put the dates in a column. Admissions, falls, refills, the day the neighbor called, the day somebody's name got added to an account, and then you look at the column and the column tells you. It always tells you. People can lie in a sentence. They almost never manage to lie in a calendar. I sat on my floor at midnight and I wrote a header at the top of a legal pad the way I've written it 400 times at work. Name, date of event, source. And then I sat there for a full minute with the pen not moving because the name I'd written was my mother's. I want you to understand how that felt. It wasn't grief. The grief came later. The grief came for weeks. What I felt at midnight on my kitchen floor was the sensation of an instrument turning around in my hand. 9 years of pointing that thing at other people's families. 9 years of being the calm one in the room, the one who says gently, "Ma'am, the pharmacy record says otherwise." And now here it was, pointed at the yard I'd just hosed off. I wrote 3 lines that night. June 27th, 4:11 p.m., DN references contents of unseen recording. Unprompted. Specify section. June 27th, 9:04 p.m., KN transmits 41 seconds. Begins mid-laugh. Recording predates cake. June 27th, 4:07 p.m., airdrop preview. Frame 1, wide of yard, pre-cake, GN and KN in frame, in conversation. 3 lines. I looked at them for a long time. And what bothered me wasn't any one of them. It was that when I put them in a column, they had the shape of something I'd seen before. Not in my family, at work, in rooms with fluorescent lights and a notary waiting in the hall. I just couldn't name it yet. I went to bed at 2 in the morning with a legal pad on the nightstand and one clean, cold, stupid thought. They're not covering something up. Covering up is panic. This has a filing system. Sunday I called Kyle. I made myself do it before I lost my nerve, standing in my driveway at 10 in the morning like an idiot. He picked up cheerful. "Hey, how's the belly?" I said, "I want the whole file, not the clip, the original." And my brother sighed. Not an angry sigh, a tired one. The sigh you make when a child asks the same thing for the 4th time. "See this," he said. "This right here, you're doing the thing again." I said, "What thing?" "The thing where a kid ruins a cake and you turn it into a whole—" He made a noise, a hand gesture noise. "You know, Mom said you'd call about this? Like this morning. She called me at 8 and said, Andy's going to call about the video." I stood in my driveway. I said, "Why would she know that?" And Kyle said, "Because we all know you, Andy." And he laughed. And there was nothing in the laugh. And he hung up, because Cole had a game. Monday I went to work and the hospital did the thing hospitals do, which is show you your own life in somebody else's room. 84-year-old man, 3rd floor, hip, 4 adult kids in the hallway, and a capacity assessment scheduled for 11 because 2 of the kids wanted him signing something before discharge and 1 of them didn't. I've sat in maybe 200 of these. I sat in this one on the corner stool with my badge on and my hands folded on my belly, and I listened to a daughter tell the physician, in a completely reasonable voice, "He's fine, he's just, you have to understand, my sister gets him worked up. Every time she visits, he ends up like this. We have a lot of documentation." The physician said, "Documentation of what?" And the daughter said, "Of how she is around him." I did not hear the rest of the assessment. I heard a fan somewhere in my own pulse, because I have heard that sentence 100 times, and it has never once, not once in 9 years, been about the sister. It's a move. It's an old move. You don't argue with the person blocking you. You build a record of the person blocking you, and then you hand the record to a professional, and the professional does the arguing for you, and it looks like the system agreed with you all on its own. I got up in the middle of a capacity assessment, which I have never done, and I walked down to the parking garage, and I sat in my car on level 3 with the engine off, and I called my grandmother's attorney. I got a paralegal. Mr. Whitcomb was in Concord until Thursday. Could she take a message? I said no. I said thank you. I hung up. And then I opened my glove compartment, because I'm the kind of person who keeps a folder in her car, and I took out a letter I'd been carrying around since the fall, without ever once looking at the date. 1 page. Whitcomb's letterhead. It said that Ruth E. Vance had executed a durable power of attorney and an advance directive naming Andrea Nelson as her attorney-in-fact and healthcare agent, that copies were enclosed, and that I should keep this letter with my records. The date at the top said October 14th. I sat in a parking garage and looked at October 14th and felt absolutely nothing, because it was just a date. I want to be honest about that. This is the part people get wrong about how this works. The evidence had been in my car for 9 months. It was the most important piece of paper in my life, and I had used it to prop up a coffee cup. It meant nothing at all until it had something to stand next to. I put it in my bag. Then I called my supervisor and told her I was leaving at 3. Let me tell you about October because you need it, and then we'll move. October 4th, Nana fell in the driveway getting the mail. Nothing broke. She lay on the asphalt for about 20 minutes until a neighbor's dog started screaming, and that is the entire reason any of this happened. The ER called me because I'm the one whose number she has memorized. I got there in 35 minutes. My parents got there the next morning. For the next 2 weeks, I drove to Rye 3 times a week. Pill organizer, grab bars, a shower chair she hated. I fought her insurance about a home evaluation and won, which nobody in my family knows and nobody ever will, and that's fine. October 11th, my father called a family meeting at their house. Coffee cake. He'd made a folder. He stood at the head of the table and said, with real feeling, that it was time somebody handled Mom's affairs and that somebody was going to be him because he was the only one with the time and the head for it. Everyone nodded. Kyle said, "Thank God." Whitney said Dad should get something for his trouble. My mother cried a little about how hard it is to watch your mother get old. And it was real, I want to say that. My mother's feelings are always real. That's what makes her so useful. I said one sentence at that meeting. I said, "Has anybody asked her?" And the table did the thing, that little dip in the air. My father said, "Andrea, nobody's asking you to do this." 3 days later, my grandmother called Whitcomb's office by herself from her kitchen phone and made an appointment. And on October 14th, she signed 2 documents naming me. I didn't ask her to. I want that on the record. I found out by mail. And here's what happened next, which for 9 months I thought was the good part. Nothing. Nothing happened. 4 days of total silence from my parents' house. No call, no blow-up. My father didn't say one word about it. Not then, not at Thanksgiving, not ever. And then everything went back to normal so smoothly, so completely, so warmly, that by December I decided the silence had been them accepting it. My family has never once let anything go. Not a comment from 1998, not a chair somebody sat in wrong. I thought I'd won something. I'd started a clock. Tuesday I drove to Rye. Nana's cottage is 9/10 of a mile from the ocean, on a road where nothing has been repainted since about 1991. And it is, in the actual market of the year 2026, worth roughly $1.5 million, because it sits on a lot her husband bought in 1968 for the price of a used truck. She has lived in it for 58 years. There's a rectangle of unfaded wallpaper in the kitchen where a phone used to hang. Her kitchen counter has 3 things on it that matter: a cordless phone, a drawer full of 40 years of receipts, every one of them held in rubber bands by year, and a green spiral notebook. The green notebook is mine. I started it October 5th, the day after the fall, because I am constitutionally incapable of caring for a human being without a log. Date, time, what I did, what she took, who else was in the house. It's not a legal document. It's a nurse's habit. 9 months of my handwriting. I sat at her table with a cup of tea, and I read the whole thing front to back for the first time. Most of it is nothing. Refill, refill. Cut her toenails. She won't use the shower chair. She used the shower chair, don't mention it. Ate half a sandwich. Told me the story about the bread man again. And scattered through it, in my own handwriting, in ink, dated, were about 11 entries I had written down and then let go, because each one of them alone was nothing at all. January 9th. RV check, signed by W per phone authorization. Told R that's not how that works. R said don't make trouble. I read that line in June, and it was still nothing. My sister had signed my grandmother's check once in January with permission over the phone for oil. Nothing. I put a small star next to it and kept reading. I want you to remember the star. Nana came in with her walker while I was on the last page and said, "You're writing in the book." Reading it. She sat down. She's 88. She forgets my aunt's name. She has never once forgotten the shape of an argument. She looked at the notebook and then at me, and she said, "Your father brought a man here." I said, "What man?" "A man, in a nice jacket." She thought about it. "He looked at the porch." I said, "When?" And my grandmother said, "Well, which time?" Which time? I got up and I walked through my grandmother's house the way I walk through a patient's apartment before a discharge, which is a specific way. You're not snooping, you're inventorying.
trip hazards, expired food, the stack of unopened mail that tells you how long somebody's been drowning.
Her mail was fine. My father had been getting her mail.
Let that sit for a second. My father had been getting her mail since roughly the fall, and I had logged that in my green notebook in November as G handling mail, one less thing, and I had written the words one less thing in ink like an idiot. I opened the junk drawer. You have to understand my grandmother. She keeps everything. There are Sears receipts in that drawer older than my mother's marriage, banded by year. There's a card from the man who repaired the furnace in 1994. She keeps everything because she came up in a world where you kept everything, and that habit, that one stubborn old lady habit, is the reason my father lost. Fourth rubber band down, in with the 2026 stack, sitting on top of a pizza coupon, a business card. Heavy stock, T. Marchetti, Seacoast Coastal Properties. I stood in her kitchen holding it, and my hands were completely steady, which is how I know I was in trouble. I said, "Nana, did the man in the jacket give you this?" She said, "He gave it to your father. Your father put it down and I picked it up." She looked mildly pleased with herself. "It's my house." I sat in her driveway with the engine running and the AC on my face, and I typed Seacoast Coastal Properties into my phone. There was no listing for her address. I want to be precise because I checked 4 different ways and I checked them all again that night. Her house was not for sale. Nothing on Zillow, nothing on the MLS, no sign, no lockbox. What there was Marchetti's own agent page, and on Marchetti's own agent page, there was a little scrolling row of tiles labeled "Coming Soon," "Off Market," the pocket listing stuff agents put up to make other agents call them. And the 4th tile down was a photograph of a porch, gray boards, a white railing with a gap in it where my grandfather never finished the spindles in 1979. The corner of a green Adirondack chair I have personally repainted twice. Under the photograph it said, "Rye, Oceanside, off-market opportunity, family has agreed to move forward, fall closing anticipated." Family has agreed. I sat in my grandmother's driveway with my hands on my grandmother's steering wheel and read the words "family has agreed" and "I am the family." Not emotionally, legally. I am the attorney in fact of the woman who owns that porch. There is not a version of this planet where that house sells without my signature on something, which meant one of 2 things. Either my father was lying to a real estate agent, or my father did not think my signature was going to be a problem for very much longer. I called him from her driveway. I shouldn't have, I did. And here's the part I still can't get over. He was lovely. "Andy, hey, where are you?" "I'm at Nana's." Good. She okay? She sounded flat on Sunday. I said, "Dad, is Nana's house for sale?" And my father did not pause. There was no gap. There was no swallow. He said, "We're looking at options. You know that place is eating her alive. Taxes, the roof. Andy, that roof is 30 years old. Nobody told me we were looking at options." "Well," my father said, and his voice got warm. Warmer, which is the tell my father gets warm the way other men get loud. "You'd know all this stuff if you came to things, honey." I said, "I come to things." "You come and you sit there." Beat. "Look, nobody's mad at you. We're all just worried about how you've been. We're all. Not I am. Not your mother is. We're all." He didn't even land on it. He said it the way you'd say the plural of a word you use constantly. Somewhere there was a we, and it had been meeting, and it had reached a finding, and the finding was about how I've been. I said something normal, and I hung up, and I sat there until the engine light dinged at me. He wasn't hiding it. That's what I couldn't get around, driving home on 1A with the ocean on my right. There was no cover-up in my father's voice. There was the settled, patient tone of a man describing a decision that has already been made to a person who is going to find out about it eventually. You don't sound like that when you're getting away with something. You sound like that when you've already won. Wednesday night, in bed, lights off. Dean was on his back with one arm over his eyes. He said, "Say the sentence out loud, the one you keep almost saying." I said, "My mother knew what was on that video before I asked for it." The ceiling fan went around a few times. Dean said, "Okay, so she'd seen it." "When, Dean?" I sat up. Kyle recorded it at 4. He was 3 feet from me from 4 to 4:11. She was across the yard. She never had it in her hand. There is no version where he showed her. So somebody else showed her. There is nobody else. Kyle had the phone. And Dean, who sells commercial HVAC and has never had an ambiguous thought in his life, said the thing that broke the whole case open. And he said it while half asleep, and he doesn't remember saying it. He said, "Then she didn't see that one. She's just seen a bunch of them."
Thursday, I went to work and did my job badly and came home and got out the legal pad. Here's what I did, and I want to be specific, because this is the part people think is a montage, and it isn't. It's 4 hours and a headache. I opened my calendar. I opened my texts. I opened the Ring app, which keeps a rolling history I pay $5 a month for and had never once looked at. And I counted every time my brother Kyle had shown up somewhere I was unannounced since October. 11 times. 11. In 9 months. My brother, who did not text me between Christmas 2023 and my grandmother's fall, who lives 25 minutes away, who has never in his adult life come to my house without being fed. 11 times, and I had logged every single one of them like a woman getting a gift. I found the texts I'd sent Dean. Kyle stopped by? Weird. Kyle came by, brought coal, was actually nice. Kyle showed up at the OB parking lot. LOL says he was getting a sandwich. That last one, April 2nd. My brother getting a sandwich in the parking lot of my obstetrician's office in Greenland, New Hampshire, which is 9 minutes from nothing and has no sandwiches. I'd told Dean it was a good sign. I'd said in my kitchen, out loud, in April, I think he's finally growing up. I put my head down on the legal pad and stayed there for a while. Then I went back through it a second time and found the part that took the floor out. 3 of the 11 weren't at my house at all. They were at Nana's, my brother's truck in my grandmother's driveway, logged in my own green notebook in my own handwriting, November 22nd, January 27th, March 3rd. And 2 of those 3 I wasn't there. I'd written them down because a neighbor mentioned it. Kay's truck here, Tuesday per Deb. That's it. That's the entry. 6 words in a notebook, written by me, filed by me, forgotten by me. What is my brother doing alone in an 88-year-old woman's house on a Tuesday in January, when the only person she'd given a key to was me? The group text came on July 2nd at 6:52 p.m. My mother, 9 people on it. I hadn't been on a family thread since March, which I'd noticed, and told myself was a settings thing. Tuesday the 14th, 9 a.m., Attorney Cabot's office, Portsmouth, parking behind the building. Nana wants to make some updates and get everything organized in one place. Won't take long. Andy, you just need to sign the 1 page. Love you all. 6 people replied with thumbs up in under 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Like they'd been holding the phone. I looked at the 1 page for about an hour. Then I Googled it because I'm not a lawyer, and the thing you sign to hand back a power of attorney is called a resignation of agent. It is 1 page. It is genuinely, physically, 1 page. My mother wasn't even lying. And here's what I finally understood, sitting on my stairs at 9 o'clock at night with my hand on my stomach. They didn't need me to sign the sale. They needed me gone. Not persuaded, not outvoted, removed. Because as long as Andrea Nelson is the attorney in fact, there is a nurse with a 9-month log and a bad attitude standing between my father and $1.5 million of oceanfront. And no amount of family has agreed makes that go away. And a woman who signs away her authority voluntarily in a lawyer's office in front of a notary with her whole loving family present, that woman never gets to complain about it afterward. 12 days. Whitney called at 10 that same night. My sister has a gift. She is the only one of them who never raises her voice, and she is worse than all of them. Oh. Hey, I'm calling because I feel like there's a weird vibe. I said, do you? Andy, come on, it was a cake. A pause, perfectly weighted. You made it about you again. I didn't answer, because I've learned that when Whitney's out of road, she builds more. And honestly, she said, nobody even does gender reveals anymore. Like, the woman who invented them apologized. She literally went on the record and said she was horrified. People set the state of California on fire doing them. And you're 33 and you're standing in a yard with a pink cake like it's a sacrament. And then when your nephew, who's 11, she kept going. And this is the thing I need you to understand, because it's why I couldn't just scream at her. She wasn't wrong. Not about the cake. She was saying something half of America was saying that year, and every word of it was true, and it was being used right at that moment as a weapon, and the truth of it was exactly what made it work. It's the perfect thing to hit somebody with, because who's going to defend a gender reveal party in 2026? Nobody. That's the point. That's why they picked it. Then Whitney, winding down, being reasonable, being the good one, said, "Look, Dad just wants everything to be one story, that's all. One story." She hung up. I stood in my kitchen holding a phone. One story. Not one truth, not one agreement. One story the singular, official family version, the one everybody repeats to the cousins and the neighbors, and at some point to somebody with a notary stamp. And to have one story, you can only have one person telling it, and anyone who tells a second one isn't wrong. They're a problem, and problems get documented. Friday morning before work, I called Nana. Nana, Tuesday the 14th, you've got a meeting at a lawyer's in Portsmouth. Silence. Then, do I? Mom sent it out, 9 in the morning. She said you want to make some updates. Longer silence. My grandmother has a very specific silence. It is not confusion. It's a woman deciding how much to say. Is that the thing your mother keeps talking about? She said. Not a question. She's been on about it, getting things organized. She sits right there and talks about it while I'm trying to watch my program. Do you want to make updates? To what? I closed my eyes in a hospital parking lot. To your power of attorney, Nana. To me. And my grandmother said, why in God's name would I do that? I could have cried. I didn't because she said the next thing. She said it in a completely different voice, smaller. The voice of someone who has been sitting on something and finally has a reason. Andrea, is somebody in my house at night? The whole parking lot went very far away. I said, why do you ask that? She said, because I hear the floor, by the pantry, the one board. A pause. And Tuesday there was a chair pulled out. I said, Nana, when Tuesday? And she said, I don't know which Tuesday. That's the trouble, isn't it? I went to work, and I could not hold a thought in my head for 10 seconds. At lunch, I did something I'd been circling for a week and hadn't let myself do. We have a binder. Every hospital has some version of it. Mine's a green 3-ring in the social work office, and there's a laminated page in it I have handed to families maybe 50 times without ever once reading it for myself. It's the undue influence screen. The elder law people put it together. It's a checklist. 4 columns. Isolation of the elder from other relationships. Dependency created or exploited. Urgency, crisis, or a manufactured deadline. A pattern of documentation of the objecting party. I stood in the social work office with a laminated page in my hand and my lunch getting cold, and I read 4 bullet points that I have used as a professional instrument for 9 years, and every one of them was a photograph of the last 9 months of my life. Isolation. My grandmother wasn't at my party. Nobody told her about my party. Dependency. My father had her mail. Urgency. Fall closings anticipated. And a pattern of documentation of the objecting party. I am the objecting party. I have been, since October 14th, the only objecting party there is. I put the page back in the binder. My hands were shaking so hard I had to use 2 of them to get the ring closed. And a nurse I like walked in and asked if I was okay. And I said, low blood sugar. And she said, eat something, Mama, and went to the microwave. I stood there and thought, they're not building a case against me for something I did. They're building a case against me for something I have. I drove to Rye that night after my shift and got there at 10:15, and I went through my grandmother's house room by room with a flashlight like a crazy person. Nothing. No sign of entry. Nothing missing. Her jewelry was in the sock. Her checkbook was in the drawer. The pantry board creaked because it's a 100-year-old board and it creaks when the furnace kicks on, and I stood on it 8 times to prove that to myself. And that was so much worse. Because nothing missing means nothing was being taken. And if nothing was being taken, then somebody was coming into an 88-year-old woman's house at night for a reason that had nothing to do with wanting anything in it. I stayed over. I told her it was the drive. At 2 in the morning, I was sitting in my grandmother's dark kitchen in a chair pulled out from the table with a glass of water I wasn't drinking, listening to a house tick. 19 weeks. The refrigerator came on. Out the window there was nothing but the black shape of the neighbor's garage and the gray where the sky was doing its summer thing over the water. And I thought with total clarity, I'm the one keeping watch now. This is what that is. This is what I've been telling other people's families to do for 9 years, and I never once thought about what it costs, which is that you sit in a dark kitchen at 2 in the morning and you're the only thing between a person and the people who love her. My phone lit up face down on the table and threw a rectangle on the ceiling. 11:58 p.m. That's how it showed. My phone's clock had never come back from a trip to Vermont. 2 in the morning, actually. It was Tyler. The text said, "Hey, are you up?" And under it, before I could answer, a screenshot. I turned the brightness down because I was in my grandmother's dark kitchen, and I looked at my phone, and what I was looking at was a photo grid. Video thumbnails, rows of them, little gray play triangles, dozens. At the top of the screen, in the small friendly font that Apple uses for absolutely everything, was the name of the album. Yard work. And under the screenshot, my 16-year-old cousin wrote, "Why is there a video of me in here? I never took this. I did not sleep." I want to be honest about the next 4 hours. I did not investigate. I did not think. I sat in a chair in the dark and shook. At 6, I texted him back, "Hey, can I see you today?" "Not a big deal. I'm not mad at you." He wrote back at 6:04, which tells you he hadn't slept either. "I'm at driver's ed till 10. And I said, "I'll come to you." Here's what I did not do. I did not text him, send me everything. I've watched 100 families blow up a story by asking for it wrong. You get one shot at a scared kid, and if you come in hot, he tells his mother, and his mother tells my mother, and by dinner there's a hole in the world where an album used to be. I sat in the lot of the high school in Dover at 10 in the morning with 2 iced coffees, and I did the thing I get paid for. I interviewed a 16-year-old, which mostly means shutting up. He got in the car and hunched over the coffee and said, "So this is probably nothing," 4 separate times, and I said probably every time, and I let the silence do it. Here's what came out over about 40 minutes. His grandfather, my father, set the album up last fall. Told him it was for keeping track of Nana's house projects, the porch, the roof, gutters. Told Tyler he'd be helpful because he's good with the phone stuff. Tyler had put maybe 4 things in it, all of them actual gutters, and then forgot it existed. The way a 16-year-old forgets a shared album, which is completely. I said, "You were filming at my party. I saw you by the gate." He said, "That wasn't my phone. Grandpa handed me his." He worked it out while he was saying it, which is how you know a kid isn't performing. I gave it back to him at the end, and I never saw any of it. It's not in there. I checked. Sit with that for a second because I didn't. Not until later. My father put a phone in a 16-year-old's hand in front of 20 relatives and said, "Get some of the yard, bud," and then took the phone back, and not one frame of my actual yard ever made it into an album called Yard Work. Then 2 nights ago, July 2nd, 5 days after the party, the thing pinged him. One new file, date stamped June 27th. The cake. My brother shot it and handed it to my father, and my father sat on it for 5 days and then filed it. And at 6:52 that same evening, my mother sent a group text about a lawyer's office. Tyler opened the album out of boredom, and it was full. Full of what? He looked at the windshield. He said, "You mostly." I said, "Tyler, can you screen record it for me, the whole thing, slow, including the top part?" And my cousin, who is 16, said, "Am I going to be in trouble?" I said, "No." And Tyler, if anybody asks, you tell them the truth, which is that I asked you and you did it. Don't lie for me ever, not once. Do you hear me? He nodded. And then he said the thing I'll think about when I'm 88. You were the only one who said anything at Thanksgiving, when he did the whole thing about my grades in front of everyone. He shrugged at the window. You said, "He's 15, Glenn?" Nobody says his name like that. I hadn't remembered it. It cost me nothing. It was a Thursday in November, and I'd said it without thinking and moved on with my life. And it turns out that the entire architecture of my father's plan came apart because 7 months earlier, for 4 seconds, somebody used his first name in defense of a kid. Tyler screen recorded the album for me in a high school parking lot at 10:40 in the morning and airdropped it to me, and it took 90 seconds and my phone got hot. The recording is 2 minutes and change. It's his thumb scrolling. 52 videos, 5 members. It lists them. It just lists them right there because it's a photo album, and photo albums are for sharing. Glenn Nelson, Diane Nelson, Kyle Nelson, Whitney Nelson, Tyler Vance. 5 people. Every one of them was in my backyard on June 27th, and none of them are me. And at the top of the screen, in gray, in the small font, shared album, owner Glenn Nelson. The album doesn't tell you when it was made. I looked. It tells you who owns it and who's in it, and that's all, because it's a photo album, not a filing cabinet. And Apple has never once imagined the room I was going to be sitting in. So I asked the kid. I said, "Tyler, when he added you, did you get an email?" He didn't know. 16-year-olds don't know what's in their email. He opened it in my passenger seat and thumbed at it for a while, and there it was, unread, underneath 4,000 things he'd never opened. Glenn Nelson wants to share the album Yard Work with you, and a date on it, the way there's a date on everything a machine has ever sent anybody. October 17th, 2025. He screenshotted it and sent me that too, and then went back to scrolling, because to him it was an email. I sat in my car in a high school parking lot and I didn't do the math yet. I want to be exact about this, because people always think the click is instant. It wasn't. I read October 17th and it went into a drawer. What I did instead was tap number 12, because it had a dark thumbnail and I wanted to know why they were dark. I want to tell you what I was braced for. I was braced for cruelty about me. 9 months of it. I had spent the drive over getting ready to watch my family laugh at me in high definition, and I had decided I could take it. And I had actually rehearsed being able to take it. Clip 12 is 11 seconds long. It is filmed from a hallway, low, at about hip height, the way you hold a phone when you don't want it seen. There's a door frame on the left of the shot. Through the door frame is a bed with a blue chenille bedspread I have washed maybe 30 times. My grandmother is sitting on the edge of that bed with her back to the camera in her housecoat, holding the cordless phone with both hands the way she does. And she is saying, No, Mr. Whitcomb, I know what I signed. I'm not confused. I'm old. I'm not confused. 11 seconds. Then whoever's holding the phone backs up and you see about a foot of hallway and it ends. I sat in a parking lot for a long time. They filmed her. In her bedroom, in her own house, talking to her own lawyer on her own phone about her own decision. An 88-year-old woman alone at home in her housecoat, and somebody stood in the hallway of a house they had no key to and held a phone at hip height. Everything I thought this story was wrong. This was never about a cake. It was never about me being humiliated in a yard. My humiliation was a byproduct. I was clip 52 of a project that had been running since October, and the project was not aimed at me at all. I was just standing in front of it. Let me ask you something, and I actually want the comment. Right now, at this exact point in the story, what do you think is on the other 51? Because I was about to find out, and I had it completely wrong, and I'd bet almost anything you have it wrong too. Tell me what you think, and then finish the story and tell me if you were close. Tyler couldn't add me to the album. That's not how it works. Only the person who made it can invite anybody, and the person who made it was my father. So we did it the stupid way. He saved them to his phone and airdropped them to me one at a time in a high school parking lot, and it took 2 hours and 11 minutes. And we sat there with the engine off and the windows down while the driver's ed car did cone drills 40 feet away. He got to 39. At 12:51, his phone rang, and it was his mother. My Aunt Bev, my mother's sister, a woman who has never had one original thought in her life and has always been the fastest phone in the family. And Tyler looked at me and I said, Answer it. Tell her the truth. Tell her you're with me. He did, because I'd told him to and because he's a good kid. I heard my aunt's voice change pitch through the phone from 3 feet away. Tyler hung up and said, I gotta go home. I said, Go. 39 of 52. That's what I drove away with. And a 2-minute screen recording of a thumb going down a grid. I want you to know that I understood, pulling out of that lot, that a clock had just started, and that the person on the other end of it was my father, and that he was faster than me at exactly one thing. He had had 9 months. I did not watch all 39. I have to say that out loud because for a while I was ashamed of it. I watched 14. Over 2 nights, in my basement, with headphones, with the door shut, because Dean's face was doing something I couldn't look at. Here's what's on them. Clip 9. Thanksgiving, my parents' driveway, from an upstairs window. Me sitting in my car for 6 minutes before going in, doing the thing everybody does, which is having a small private cry in a Honda so you can walk in okay. Somebody stood at a window and filmed the whole 6 minutes and let it run. Clip 23. Me at Nana's front door, February 3rd, 4 seconds, just me putting a key in a lock. 4 seconds. That's the whole clip. Somebody drove to Rye and filmed 4 seconds of a woman unlocking a door and drove home. Clip 26. The parking lot of the Market Basket in February, me and Kyle arguing. You can't hear it. You can see my hands. Clip 35. Me coming out of the OB office in Greenland on April 2nd. On the phone, laughing at something. 90 seconds. Filmed from a parked car. And I'm going to tell you the thing that finally broke me, and it isn't any of that. Nobody's laughing. Not one of them. Not a chuckle, not a whisper, no commentary. My brother, who could not stop laughing at a cake in June, does not make a sound on a single one of these. They are silent, steady, well-framed, and boring. Some of them are 11 seconds. Some of them are 2 minutes. They are all held level. They're not jokes. They were never jokes. They're coverage. I sat in my basement at 1 a.m. on July 6th with somebody's leftover fireworks still going off somewhere over the river, and the whole thing turned over in my head like a car. There is no deleted part. That's what I'd been chasing since June 27th. That's what the entire first 2 weeks of my life had been about. The missing piece of the cake video, the bit Kyle cut, the smoking gun in the 41 seconds. I had built my whole understanding around the idea that somewhere there was one cruel moment they were hiding. There isn't. He didn't hide anything. He sent me the cake part because the cake part was the only part I was ever supposed to see. And the rest wasn't a secret cruel moment. It was a wide shot of an empty yard. There are 52 files. I laid them out by date. 5 to 7 a month. Every month. Since October. Not clustered around fights, not clustered around holidays, evenly, like shifts. You do not do this because you're angry at someone. Anger is not this organized. Anger doesn't hold a phone level for 2 minutes on a woman having a cry in her car. Anger gets bored in November. This was a job. Somebody was doing a job and had been doing it on a schedule for 3/4 of a year and had been coming to my house and eating my food while he did it. And I had written in my phone in April, I think he's finally growing up. Dean watched one, just one. I made him. I said you have to see one of these or you're going to keep thinking I'm exaggerating. I gave him clip 9. Thanksgiving, the window, 6 minutes of me crying in a Honda. He watched about 40 seconds of it, and then he stood up and walked out of the basement, and I heard him get to the top of the stairs and stop. He came back down and stood in the doorway, and he had his hand over his mouth, and he said through it, "Andy, who is this for?" And I said, "What?" He said, "You keep saying they filmed you. Fine. They're monsters. Fine. I've known that since the rehearsal dinner. But nobody films their sister for 9 months for fun. This is edited. This is filed. This has a name on it." He took his hand off his mouth. "Who's the audience?" I sat on the basement floor, and I could not answer my husband's question. And it was the best question anybody asked in the entire 9 months, and it was 1:40 in the morning on the 6th of July. I called out of work that Monday. Then I did what I do. I got the green notebook from Rye. I got the legal pad. I got the screen recording, and I paused it 52 times and wrote down every date stamp, and it took most of the day and my hand cramped. 2 columns. Left column, my care log. 9 months of a nurse's handwriting. Every visit, every call, every refill, every time I did anything for Ruth Vance. Right column, 52 dates. And when I put them next to each other, I had to get up and walk around my kitchen island 4 times. Every single clip falls within 48 hours of an entry in my log. Every one. October 20th. I take her to the eye doctor, clip on the 21st. November 8th. I fight her insurance about the home eval. I log the call, clip on the 9th. January 9th, the check thing with Whitney, I logged it, clip on the 10th. April 9th, I do a med review at her kitchen table and write it up, clip on the 11th. They weren't following me. They were following the log, not the notebook itself. Nobody read my handwriting. They were following the fact of it. Every time I did something for my grandmother, every time I acted like her agent, every time I generated a record, within 2 days there was a counter record, a file, a clip of me looking tired, or crying, or arguing, or standing at a door with a key. My father was not building a scrapbook of a daughter he hated. My father was building a second chart. And I know what a second chart is for. A second chart is for a room with a professional in it. You don't make a competing record for your family. Your family will believe whatever you tell them at Thanksgiving. You make a competing record for the one kind of person who won't take your word for it. Dean's question had an answer. It had had an answer since October. I stood in my kitchen at 4 in the afternoon and I said it out loud to nobody. It's for a lawyer. And then, because I say things in order, I said the second half out loud too. And my voice did something strange. Why 52? Why not 51? What starts it? I went back to the screen recording and scrolled to the bottom of the grid, to the oldest one, clip 1, and I read the date stamp. October 17th. The same day my father sent a 16-year-old an email. He didn't make the album and let it sit. He made it and loaded it the same afternoon. And I stood in my kitchen with my hand in my bag, digging for a folder I'd been carrying in my car since the fall and had used to prop up a coffee cup. And I got the letter out and I put it on the counter, and the date at the top of the letter said October 14th. 17. 3 days. I got down on the kitchen floor. Not dramatically. My legs stopped participating and I sat down on the tile with my back against the dishwasher, in the same spot I'd sat in on June 27th, and I put both hands flat on the floor and breathed. 3 days. My grandmother called a lawyer by herself, drove herself, signed 2 pages, and named me on the 14th. and within 72 hours, before the letter even got to my mailbox, before I'd done a single thing wrong, my father opened an album and gave it a name so boring that nobody in this family ever once asked about it. Yard work. He didn't get angry at me in October. That's what I'd been unable to understand for 9 months. Everyone else in my family has to yell. He didn't yell. He didn't say one word. He opened a file. Tuesday I got Whitcomb. I'd called 5 times. This time he picked up his own phone at 8:10 in the morning, which is how you know a man is 70 and has no assistant before 9. He was careful. I want to be fair to him. He was exactly as careful as he should have been. I said who I was, and he said he knew who I was, and then he wouldn't tell me anything, because his client is my grandmother, and I am not my grandmother. And he said, I'm not able to discuss Mrs. Vance's file with you over the telephone, 3 separate times in the flattest voice you've ever heard. I said, I'm not asking about her file. I'm asking a general question. If a family wanted to replace an existing agent, what would that look like? He thought about it, and Whitcomb, God bless him, gave me 1 sentence and then hung up on me, and the sentence was worth more than everything else that happened that week. He said, generally, if there's a competing instrument being executed, the first thing I'd want to know is who's paying for the evaluation. Who's paying for the evaluation? I called Cabot's office at 8:40. And here's the thing about being a case manager. I call law offices for a living. I know exactly what's privileged and what's just a receptionist reading a screen. I did not lie. I gave my legal name and my actual status. I said, this is Andrea Nelson. I'm the current healthcare agent and attorney-in-fact for Ruth Vance. There's a meeting on your calendar Tuesday the 14th at 9. I have 2 administrative questions. Who convened the appointment, and who's the retained client on the matter? The paralegal typed. She was nice. She had no idea she was doing anything. She said, okay, so the appointment was set by Diane Nelson, and the retainer's in Glenn Nelson's name. Is there a billing question? I said no, thank you, and I sat in my car in the hospital garage on level 3. My father is paying for the lawyer who will sit across a table on Tuesday the 14th and form a professional opinion about whether my 88-year-old grandmother is competent to fire me. My father hired her. My mother booked her. And I got a text with a heart at the end telling me to show up and sign 1 page. Saturday, I ran into Deb Fenno in the Hannaford parking lot. Deb has lived next door to my grandmother since before I was born. She's the one who called me the day my brother's truck was in the driveway. She's 70. She's kind. She has no agenda on this earth beyond her tomatoes. She saw my stomach first and made the noise. Then she took both my hands and did the thing where she got quiet and sympathetic, and she said, "Oh, honey, how are you doing, really?" And I said, "Fine." And she squeezed my hands and she said, "Your mother told me about the party." I stood in a parking lot with a cart between us. I said, "What did she tell you?" And Deb, gently, meaning every syllable of it, with actual love for me in her face, said that you had a hard time with the baby and the hormones and everything with Ruth on your plate. She patted my hand. She said you got very upset over a cake and you had to leave your own party. I had to leave my own party. I never left. I hosed the table down at 8 o'clock at night in my own yard. And here's the part that put my hand on the cart handle. Deb wasn't the first. I could see it in how practiced her sympathy was. She wasn't reacting to news. She was checking in on a situation she'd been following. I said, "Deb, when did she start telling you about me?" And Deb Fenno thought about it honestly, the way a decent person does when you ask them a real question, and she said, "Oh gosh, since the fall? Since Ruth had her fall, I think. She calls me sometimes when she's driving." Since the fall. My mother had been calling my grandmother's neighbor, the one witness on that road, the one person who could ever say who came and went from that house, for 9 months. Not to spread gossip. My mother doesn't gossip. My mother worries out loud, at length, to the exact right people. And by the time she's done, there's a version of you in their head with a date on it. Kyle shot them. My father filed them. My mother made sure that by the time anybody with a stamp ever asked, there'd be a neighbor of 40 years who already knew from a reliable source that Ruth's granddaughter had been having a hard time. I said, "Deb, I'm going to ask you one favor, and you can say no." She said, "Anything." I said, "If anybody ever asks you when you started hearing that about me, don't say the fall, say the date. You'll remember the date." She looked at me for a second. And Deb, who grows tomatoes and has never done a strategic thing in her life, said, "It was the week Ruth got that letter. Diane called me the day after. I remember because I was doing the storm windows." Sunday dinner, July 12th, 2 days out. I went. Of course I went. Dean said don't, and I said if I don't go, that's a clip. My mother made the pork thing. My father said grace. Kyle told a story about Cole's travel team, and everybody laughed in the right places. Whitney's kids ran through twice. Nobody said the word Tuesday. Nobody said the word lawyer. It was the warmest, easiest dinner I have had in that house in 10 years, and every single person at that table except my grandmother, who was not invited, had spent 9 months contributing to a video file about me. I sat there and I watched my mother's hands. That's all I did for an hour. I watched Diane Nelson's hands move a serving spoon, refill my father's water without being asked, put a dish towel over the rolls. And I thought about that album and about how in 9 months there is not one clip in it that my mother took. Not one. She never filmed anything. She was never behind the camera once. She was the room they were played in. Every one of those 52 files went through my mother's eyes before it turned into a sentence at a barbecue. Kyle shot them. My father filed them. And my mother watched every single one and then went and told my Aunt Bev and my cousins and the neighbors and everybody at her church the finished version. Poor Andy. She's been so up and down. She's not sleeping. She got so upset at her own party over a cake. Bev, a cake. She wasn't the bystander in this. She was the distribution. And halfway through dessert, my mother looked at me with total, uncomplicated love and said, "Are you eating enough, honey? You look thin in the face." It is the cruelest thing anybody said to me all year, and she meant it. That's the part nobody believes. She meant it entirely. I got my bag at the door. Whitney caught my wrist in the hallway by the coats. My sister has never touched me on purpose in her adult life. Her hand was cold, and her grip was too tight, and she looked back down the hall toward the kitchen twice while she did it. She said low, "Just sign it, Andy, please. Please." I drove home doing 40 and a 55 with my hands at 10 and 2. Please. Whitney does not say please. Whitney has never needed anything from me. Whitney is the one who explains, who summarizes, who tells you calmly why you're the problem. And she just stood in a hallway and begged me and looked over her shoulder at our father while she did it. You don't beg for someone else's plan. You beg for your own neck. I got home and got the green notebook out and went to January. January 9th, RV check signed by W per phone authorization. Told R that's not how that works. R said don't make trouble. There was a small star next to it in my own handwriting. I'd put it there in June and forgotten about it inside of an hour, because in June, it was nothing. My sister signed my grandmother's check with her hand, making my grandmother's name. I'd let it go in January because it was for the oil company, and Nana said it was fine and I was tired, and it was one check. I'd written it down anyway, because I write everything down, because it's a nurse's habit, because I cannot help myself. And in January, my father had found out about it. He must have. Nothing happens in that family he doesn't find out. So he'd had it. Since January. He'd had his daughter's signature on his mother-in-law's check for 6 months, and he'd never used it, and he'd never mentioned it. And that's why Whitney had spent 9 months being the reasonable one. That's why she calls me instead of yelling at me. That's why she was in a hallway saying, please. My sister isn't on his side. My sister is on his hook. I called her Monday morning. She picked up on the second ring, which told me she'd been holding the phone. I said, Whitney, it's me. I'm going to say one thing, and then I'm going to hang up, and I don't want you to answer. Nothing on the line. I said, I know about the check in January. I've known since January. It's in my book. I'm not going to use it. Not tomorrow, not ever. I want you to know that before you walk into that room, so that whatever you do in there, you do it because you decided to. And I hung up. Dean said, are you insane? That's the only leverage you have. I said, it's leverage on the wrong person. And I want to be straight with you about why, because it wasn't nobility. My sister is not a good person. She signed an old woman's name and she called me a drama queen for 9 months. But my father spent 9 months building a file on his own daughter to take his mother-in-law's house, and the whole engine of it, the entire machine, runs on people being afraid of what he's got on them. You don't beat that by getting your own file. 40 minutes later, Tyler texted me. Grandpa took me off the thing. And then, I sat down on my stairs. He was gone. The album was closed. Whatever was on 40 through 52, I was never getting it, because Glenn Nelson had removed a 16-year-old from a photo album at 11:20 in the morning on the day before the meeting, which meant somebody had told him, and it doesn't matter who. 39 of 52, that's the hand. Except I still had the screen recording. 2 minutes of a thumb going down a grid, and a grid shows thumbnails. I went through it frame by frame on my laptop until my eyes watered, and I got to number 40, and I stopped it, and I zoomed in until it fell apart into squares. Clip 40 is 4 minutes and 2 seconds long. It is the longest thing in that album by almost double. The thumbnail is dark, nearly black. There's a hard vertical line down the left, which is a door frame. There's an orange smear low and right, which is the light over a stove, on low, the way you leave it. And there's a bottom corner of something pale with a repeating pattern on it. I know that pattern. I've leaned on it. It's the wallpaper in my grandmother's kitchen. The rectangle of it that never faded, where a phone used to hang on the wall. The timestamp says 2:11 a.m. Somebody was in my grandmother's kitchen at 2 in the morning for 4 minutes with a phone, and my grandmother sat on the edge of her bed and asked me, in a small voice, "Is somebody in my house at night?" I never opened it. I want that clear because of what happened afterward. I never got it. I had a thumbnail the size of my thumbnail and a length and a time and a piece of wallpaper. Monday, July 13th, the day before. I did not build a case. This is where everybody expects the montage, and there isn't one. I had 39 video files, a green notebook, a screen recording, and a letter. And if I walked into a lawyer's office and dumped all of that on a table, I'd be exactly the woman my father had spent 9 months describing. Unstable, obsessive. Look at her, she's got a binder about her own family. So I printed 2 pages. That's it, 2. Page 1, Whitcomb's letter, October 14th. Page 2, 2 things on 1 sheet. On the top half, a still frame off Tyler's screen recording. The name of the album, the owner, the member list. On the bottom half, the screenshot of an unread email in a 16-year-old's inbox. Glenn Nelson wants to share the album Yard Work with you. October 17th, 2025. And then I made a third thing that I didn't print because I wasn't sure I'd use it, and I put it in the front pocket of my bag. 1 sheet, handwritten, 2 columns, 52 dates against 9 months of a care log. And one more thing went into that pocket, and I want to be honest about it because I put it in there the way you put a knife in a drawer you have no plans to open. A screenshot of a real estate agent's coming soon page. And taped to the top of it, a business card I'd taken out of my grandmother's junk drawer with her permission because it's her house. I did not know what I was going to do with it. I knew what it was. Then I called my grandmother at 8 at night. I did not coach her. I want to be extremely clear about that because they said afterward that I did. I said, "Nana, tomorrow, whatever anybody asks you, you don't have to be fast. You're allowed to think. You're allowed to say, I don't know yet. Nobody in that room gets to hurry you. Not them, not the lawyer, not me." Silence for a second. She said, "Is that what you tell your patients?" I said, "Every day of my life." She said, "Huh." And then she said, "Andrea, what's my house worth?" I said, "About $1.5 million, Nana." And my grandmother said, "Well," long pause, "that's a lot of yard work." At 11 o'clock that night, my father called. I let it ring 3 times. Andy. Warm, tired, the voice of a man at the end of a long day of doing right by everybody. "Hey, look, tomorrow, just do the easy thing, honey. 1 page, then we all go get breakfast." I said, "Okay, Dad." He said, "That's my girl," and hung up. And I sat on the edge of my bed with my hand on my stomach and one thought running. He's not nervous. He has no idea. Tuesday, July 14th, 9 in the morning. Attorney Nora Cabot's office is on the 2nd floor of a brick building in Portsmouth with a bakery underneath it, so the entire thing smells like croissants, which I did not expect and could not stop noticing. Conference room, long table, water pitcher with the little pebbled glasses. My grandmother was already in the good chair by the window with her walker parked and her purse in her lap and her hair done, which meant somebody had picked her up early, and my mother was sitting next to her with a hand on her arm. There was a notary at the end of the table. Young guy, blazer, stamp out, phone face down. He'd been booked for a half hour, and he wanted to be somewhere else. My father took the seat at the head. Not on purpose. He just takes it. Kyle came in 4 minutes late with a coffee. Whitney was already there in the corner chair, with her hands folded, and she did not look at me one time. Cabot came in with a folder and sat down and did the thing lawyers do, where they say your name back to you to be sure. She was maybe 55, reading glasses on a chain, completely neutral face, and I looked at her and thought, "You are the only person in this room who does not know what this is, and everything depends on you." She said, "So, Mrs. Vance, We're here this morning to talk about your power of attorney and get some paperwork organized. Before we start, Glenn, would you like to summarize where the family's at? My father would. I have to hand it to him. It took 90 seconds and it was beautiful. He didn't attack me. That's the thing you have to understand about my father, an amateur attacks. He said the family had been struggling for a while with Mom's care, that it had gotten complicated last fall, that everybody had done their best, and that they'd all sat down together and agreed the simplest thing was to get everything under one roof so there'd be no confusion going forward. He used the word confusion 3 times gently, and he never once looked at me. He said, "We've all agreed." And then my mother on cue, without a beat, in the warmest voice in New England, "It's just been so hard on all of us, especially Andy." She squeezed my grandmother's arm. "She's been under so much with the baby, and she's not sleeping. She got so upset at her own party, we were all just—" And she trailed off, perfectly, into a little sad smile. And every syllable of that had been rehearsed on my Aunt Bev for 9 months. Whitney gave the clean version, no emotion. "There's been a lot of tension. We're just trying to lower the temperature." Kyle shrugged and said, "Yeah. That's it. That's the whole prosecution. 4 people, 4 registers, 1 story." Cabot wrote something. Then she looked up over the glasses. "Ms. Nelson, before I have you sign the resignation, is there anything you want to say?" And my father, still not looking at me, said, "She's fine, Nora, she's—" And Cabot said, "I asked her." I put 2 pages on the table. I didn't stand up. I didn't slide them dramatically. I put them down and turned them around so they faced her, the way you turn a chart around for a physician. I said, "I'm not going to talk about the party. I want to show you 2 dates." I put my finger on the first page. "This is a letter from Ruth Vance's attorney, Mr. Whitcomb in Portsmouth, confirming she executed a durable power of attorney and an advance directive naming me. You'll want to note the date at the top, October 14th. Nobody moved. This part is boring. That's why it works. If you come in hot, they get to be the calm ones." I put my finger on the second page. "This is a screenshot of a shared photo album on my father's iCloud account. It's called Yard Work." I read the member list out loud. Just read it, flat, like a med list. Glenn Nelson, Diane Nelson, Kyle Nelson, Whitney Nelson, Tyler Vance. I looked up. Tyler is 16. He's my aunt's son. 5 members. I'm not one of them. And then I put my finger on the bottom half of the page. This is the invitation my father sent when he opened it. It's still sitting in that kid's email, unread. October 17th, 2025. I move my finger up to the oldest thumbnail in the grid, and the first file in the album is date-stamped the same day. Cabot picked up the page. She didn't say anything. My father laughed. Not nervous, genuinely amused, and he leaned back, and he said the thing he'd say if he were guilty, and the thing he'd say if he weren't, which is exactly why he said it. "Nora, that's a photo album for the house. We've got a porch that's coming off. There's gutters in there." And Cabot said mildly, "How many photos?" There was a small pause. It was about a half-second long. "It's the only mistake my father made in 9 months, and he didn't even make it. His son made it for him." Because Kyle, who had been quiet, who was bored, who had a coffee and a kid's game at 4, said, "It's like yard work." He said it the way you'd bat a fly. And it landed in that room like a dropped glass, because there were now 2 men at the same table telling a lawyer that 52 video files were about gutters, and one of them had said it a half-second too fast. My mother did not speak. I want you to sit with that. From the moment the words shared album came out of my mouth, my mother, who had been talking for 90 seconds, did not say one more word in that room. Cabot said, 52. I said, 52 video files, 5 to 7 a month, every month since October 17th. I have 39 of them. I paused. I'm not going to play 39 videos. I'm going to play 11 seconds. I put my phone on this table and turned it around, and I hit play on clip 12. The room got the sound of a hallway, a door frame, a bed with a blue chenille bedspread, and an 88-year-old woman in a housecoat sitting on the edge of it with her back to the camera, holding a cordless phone with both hands. No, Mr. Whitcomb, I know what I signed. I'm not confused. I'm old, I'm not confused. Then a foot of hallway, then nothing. 11 seconds is a very long time in a conference room. My grandmother had turned her head toward the phone at the sound of her own voice. She was looking at the table with an expression I had never seen on her face in 33 years. I took the third page out of my bag, the handwritten one, the one I wasn't sure I'd use, and I put it in front of Cabot, not in front of my father. I never once put anything in front of my father. That's my care log, I said. I'm a case manager. I've kept a log on my grandmother since October 5th, the day after her fall, because that's what I do for a living and I can't not do it. Left column is every time I acted as her agent, every visit, every refill, every insurance call. Right column is the date stamp of every one of the 52 files. Cabot read it. She read it for a long time. She's an elder law attorney. She did not need me to explain it. I explained it anyway, because the notary was in the room and I wanted it said out loud. Every clip lands within 48 hours of an entry in my log. Every one. They weren't filming my life. They were filming the record. And then I asked my question. I did not ask my father. I want that on the record too, because it's the only thing in this story I planned. I had planned exactly one sentence, and I had planned who I was going to say it to. I looked at Nora Cabot and I said, "Ms. Cabot, in this meeting, whose capacity is being evaluated?" Nobody answered. Cabot took her glasses off. I said, "Because I want to be sure I understand the sequence. My grandmother changed her power of attorney on October 14th. She did it alone. She called Mr. Whitcomb from her kitchen and drove herself, and nobody in this room knew until the mail came." I put my hand on the second page. The album was created on October 17th. That's 72 hours later. Before I knew. Before I'd done anything. Before there was one single thing to document. I let it sit. Nobody picks that week by accident. There is a specific sound a room makes when it stops. It isn't silence. It's the HVAC and a truck downshifting outside on Congress Street and a notary very carefully not moving his chair. Whitney was looking at my mother. Not at my father. At my mother. 9 months of being the reasonable one, and in the end my sister turned her head toward the person who'd actually been running it. Kyle reached for his phone and then stopped with his hand halfway there, because he suddenly could not think of a single thing to do with a phone in that room, and he put his hand back on the table. And my father said, "That's different." That's all he said. That's the whole thing. A man who talks for a living, who had run this table for 9 months, who had said the word confusion 3 times in 90 seconds, looked at a lawyer he was paying and said, "That's different," and could not say what it was different from. So I showed her what it was different from. I had not planned this one. My hand was moving before I decided anything. I took the last page out of the front pocket and put it in front of Nora Cabot. This is on a real estate agent's website. T. Marchetti, Seacoast Coastal Properties. That's his card taped to the top. My grandmother took it out of my father's hand in her own kitchen and kept it, because she keeps everything. Cabot looked at the photograph. Anyone would. It's a porch. "That's my grandmother's porch," I said. "That's my grandfather's railing. He never finished the spindles in 1979, and the gap's still there. The house isn't listed. No sign, no lockbox, nothing on the MLS. I checked 4 ways. It's on his coming soon page, which is where agents put the things that aren't for sale yet. And I read the line under the photograph out loud, flat, the way you read a med list. Rye, Oceanside, off-market opportunity. Family has agreed to move forward. Fall closing anticipated." I put my hands back in my lap. "Family has agreed," I said. "I'm the family. I'm the attorney in fact for the woman who owns that porch. Nobody has asked me one question about that house." Cabot stopped looking at the page. She looked at my father for a long time, and then she said in a voice with nothing in it, "Glenn, is this property under a listing agreement?" And my father, who had never in his life failed to answer a question, said nothing. He looked at the water pitcher, and then my grandmother spoke. She didn't say it loudly. She was still looking at the table at the corner of my phone. She said, "Glenn, was that my bedroom?" Nobody answered her either, and Nora Cabot closed her pen. That's it. That's the whole climax. There was no shouting, nobody confessed, nobody stood up. A 55-year-old woman in reading glasses capped a pen and set it down parallel to her folder, and that small plastic click ended 9 months. She said, "We're not signing anything this morning." My father started, "Nora." She said, "Glenn, I'm going to ask you not to talk for a minute." And he didn't. My father did not talk, because he had spent 9 months building a machine whose whole purpose was to make a professional take him seriously, and the machine had worked perfectly, and she was taking him very seriously. She did 3 things. She said the appointment was postponed, and she wasn't going to reschedule it until she'd spoken with Mrs. Vance alone and with Mr. Whitcomb. She said the existing power of attorney stands, present tense, unchanged, and she said, looking at my father, "I want the album, all of it, every file, the member history, and the dates. and I want everything you and Mr. Marchetti have put in writing." The notary put his stamp in his bag, and then Cabot looked down the table at me and did the only thing that made me almost lose it. She said, "Miss Nelson," and then, because there were 3 of us, the other Miss Nelson, "I need you to not delete anything. Nothing. Not one file, not a text. Do you understand?" I said, "I understand. I'm a nurse. I don't delete things." If you've made it this far, and I know how long this has been, take 1 second and just sit with this part, because it's the part I still can't explain to people. I didn't win in that room. Nobody handed me anything. A woman I'd met 11 minutes earlier looked at a calendar and did her job. That's all justice was. It was 2 dates in the right order in front of a professional. And I'd been carrying one of them in my glove compartment since October, holding up a coffee cup. If there's someone in your life telling you that you're the dramatic one, the difficult one, the one who makes everything about herself, write down the dates, just the dates. You don't have to argue with anybody. Let the calendar do it. I helped my grandmother out. She wanted to do the stairs herself, so we did the stairs herself, which took 4 minutes, and my mother tried to take her other arm at the landing, and my grandmother said, "No, thank you, Diane," and my mother let go. Kyle was in the hallway by the bakery door. He had the coffee still. He hadn't drunk any of it. He said, "Andy, you know Dad's the one who—" And he stopped. He stood there in a brick hallway that smelled like croissants, and he could not finish the sentence, because there is no second half of that sentence that doesn't end with something he did. I've thought about what I should have said. I've written about 6 versions. What I actually said was, "I know." And I walked out with my grandmother, and I did not ask him to finish it, and I have not asked him since, and I'm not going to. That was July 14th, yesterday. Here's what yesterday and today have looked like, and then I have to tell you about the phone call. Whitney texted at 4 p.m. 1 line. "I didn't know. She's lied to me for 9 months, and I think that one's true, and I think it doesn't matter, and I haven't answered it." My mother left a voicemail at 9:40 last night. 91 seconds. I've listened to it twice. There is no apology in it. There is not one sentence in it about a camera. It is entirely about how she's not sleeping and how a family is a family and how I've always needed everything to be a certain way. She says the word "we" 4 times. At the end, she says she loves me and she means it, and that's the part I can't do anything with. My father has not called. My father is not going to call. My father is going to sit in his kitchen and wait for this to become a thing that happened to him. Dean took today off. He's currently in my kitchen making a spreadsheet because that's how he loves people. And this morning I drove to Rye and sat on the porch with the gap in the railing where my grandfather never finished the spindles in 1979. And my grandmother put her hand on my stomach without asking, which she is allowed to do and nobody else is. And she said, "It's a girl?" I said, "It's a girl." She said, "Good, they can't stand that." I got the green notebook out and I started a new page. New heading, same handwriting. Here's my boundary, and it's not the one people expect. I'm not going no contact. I'm not making a speech. I'm the agent for an 88-year-old woman who needs a roof and a ride to the eye doctor, and I intend to keep being that until she tells me not to. But there is exactly one rule now, and I said it out loud on that porch so I'd have said it somewhere. Nobody in my family gets a version of me anymore that isn't written down. That's it. That's the whole boundary. You want to tell people what I said? Fine, it's in the book, with the date. At 4:10 this afternoon, my phone rang. Unknown number 603. A woman said she was an investigator with the state's Bureau of Elderly and Adult Services, that a report had been made by an attorney, and that she'd been assigned this morning. She had my grandmother's name and address, and my name and my title on the POA, and she read them all back to me correctly. Then she said, "Miss Nelson, I want to ask you about one specific file. It's 4 minutes and 2 seconds. The album's index has it as number 40. And I said, "I never opened that one. I couldn't get it. I only have the thumbnail. It's her kitchen. It's 2 a.m. I said, "What's on it?" And the line went quiet. Not a pause. 3 full seconds of a woman not saying anything in an office with my grandmother's file open in front of her. Then she said, "Miss Nelson, are you at home right now? You should probably sit down." And I said yes, and I turned toward the window to sit down. And out on the street, my father's truck pulled into the curb and stopped.